Good morning and welcome to the Home Affairs Select Committee. This is our second session on our inquiry into the culture of the Fire and Rescue Service. The aims for the session this morning are to find out how senior leaders have responded to the specific reports about cultural change, to understand how senior leaders are held to account, to see how effective recruitment and retention is for people from underrepresented groups, and to look at the effectiveness of the Home Office's work about the Fire and Rescue Service. So can I welcome our first panel this morning, and I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves in turn. Perhaps we could start with you, Mr MacDougall.
Good morning. My name is Rob MacDougall. I'm the Director of Community Safety and the Chief Fire Officer at Oxfordshire County Council. I'm also the Committee Chair for the National Fire Chiefs Council People, Culture and Leadership work.
Thank you.
Morning, I'm Johnston. I'm the Chief Fire Officer for Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service, and I'm also one of the Vice Chairs for the National Fire Chiefs Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name's Kathryn Billing. I'm the Chief Fire Officer of Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service and also the National Fire Chiefs Council Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Knox and I'm Chair of the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Authority and Vice Chair of the Fire Services Management Committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is our second session, as I said at the beginning. In our first session, I think the committee was really quite concerned by some of the evidence that we heard. And I just wanted to ask each of you to reflect on what Nazir Afzal said to us in that session. He said, "I do not shy away from using the terms institutional racism, institutional misogyny, and institutional homophobia. It is not individuals, it is systematic failure." I wonder, perhaps each of you in turn, perhaps you might want to address that and whether you agree with what Nazir Afzal said to the committee about the culture in the Fire and Rescue Service. I don't know who'd like to start us off.
I'm happy to. Oh,
yep.
Sorry, would you like to?
I'm happy to. Yes, I absolutely agree with Nazir on this point. The Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service had an independent report commissioned by the Chief Fire Officer, and the findings in that report, 37 recommendations, did find that that statement did apply. But I say it with a sadness, because we have got 99% of our workforce are brilliantly amazing people. But so I'm sad for them because they really want to address the issue that we're facing here today, which is misbehaviour and bad behaviour. But it is a small minority, but we must address it and we mustn't be complacent.
I think actually what Nazir Afzal was actually saying was institutional. Yeah. So it's not just a small minority, it's the institution that has a problem.
And the individuals, Madam Chair, are those that make up the institution, but a lot of those individuals really want to do a really good job.
I'm not disputing that firefighters overall are doing a very good job in firefighting. The problem is with the culture that exists within these fire and rescue services. You were the chair of the authority. You had governance over the fire and rescue service.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I did.
Did you not know what was going on there?
Yes.
You knew what was going on.
There are cases within the fire service, and we knew what was going on. There was.
What did you do about it?
That we absolutely addressed the cases that came forward.
Did you? Because
yes.
when you stood by what I think the Chief Fire Officer of Dorset and Wiltshire said, Ben Ansell, and he told ITV that the service didn't have a problem with women, and that he was shocked and appalled about what we'd found. And you kind of said you agreed with him on that, didn't you?
May I take just a moment to explain the context of what the Chief Fire Officer said, and that was that we absolutely do not have a problem with employing women. Indeed, his service in the top team, 50% are women, so we positively encourage the employment of women, but there are issues that women face in the service, and hence the internal inquiry that we conducted, that the Chief instructed after the fire, the London Fire Brigade Union's report. We did a gap analysis against that, and we investigated, did focus groups with our staff to find out what the service could be doing more positively to keep individuals safe and have safe conversations about the issues that we're facing them in workplaces.
Did you speak to any of the women who were who'd had the harassment, the bullying, the abuse?
I personally wouldn't, because I'm the elected councillor, and I would be removed from actually being able to have the identify.
Sorry, you're the chair of the
Yes.
Fire and Rescue Authority.
Yes.
And you've not spoken to any of the firefighters who had this appalling experience in the organisation that you are providing governance for?
Those individuals would have the protection that they had asked for if they requested it. So no, I have not spoken directly.
Do you think you should have done?
I don't think it would be appropriate if they didn't feel they could. I'm there. I'm visible. Anyone can come and speak to me within the service, but it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to actually go and seek out individuals if they didn't feel comfortable. There is a safe space for them to have the conversation with the relevant officers and the trusted guardians that we now have in place in order. I find
that
incredible.
Yes, incredible. I find that incredible that you have a role of governance over an organisation and you didn't think that you should speak to people, to women who'd been abused by the organisation.
My role is to have accountability for the chief fire officer.
Who you've stood by, and he's saying there's no problem with women.
We don't have a problem with employing women, but women...
That's not what he said. He said a problem with women. The service didn't have a problem with women. And then the investigation found that it certainly did have a problem with women.
There is... I have weekly meetings with the chief. I know him extremely well on a professional basis. He would inform me of incidents that I needed to know about, but I would not have been able to have a conversation with whether they were male or female about an incident without...
Okay, well, I think we probably do need to move on, and I'm sure other members will have questions, but I find that attitude as someone in a position of responsibility incredible, that you do not think you have the role of asking questions and talking to firefighters. I find that incredible. I'm going to move on to our next witness, though, to give perhaps an overview generally about what was said about the misogyny and racism and homophobia. Kathryn Billing, would you like to? Yes, please.
If you don't mind, I will give my services perspective because we're probably slightly different. So we've been doing work on the topic about racism, we've been doing work with Black Voices Cornwall. And I have called out our service as being institutionally racist, and and obviously I'm sure you can understand that will spark up debate. And I think it's right that we have that debate. But for me, when I'm sat there looking at my organisation, and I have got a really good gender representation in my top team, 2/3 are women, which is brilliant. But I can't see any diversity in relation to ethnicity. Now, I recognise that Cornwall, we don't have a huge demographic, ethnic demographic, but again, that isn't an excuse. And when we were, we were predominantly on-call service, and we had somebody from that's required a prayer room. And when we looked at our fire stations, the group manager said, "Do you know what? We don't have these facilities in place." So absolutely, when you look at policies, procedures, training, we are institutionally racist. If we look at some of our policies, it's only up until recently, kind of the colour of your hair, tattoos, those types of things that are actually make a person, that are true to some people's values and have meaning. Those weren't allowed. So again, it is our policies and our procedures that are barriers to people being themselves in our organisations.
So you're saying institutionally racist, but you're not saying that it's institutionally misogynist?
I am saying, no, definitely, because if you look at some of our facilities, we've recently had a cause for concern around gender-inclusive facilities across our stations. And I'm sure that there are, you know, I'm sure that's the case in other areas, because our facilities, you know, are not inclusive for you know, for everyone. Because
Sorry, what do you mean gender inclusive? Because are you talking about sex? Are you talking about the male female? Is that what you're saying, or
male, female, or transgender? You know, so they're not inclusive of everybody. So there are not facilities that can be used by that are inclusive for all genders. So yeah, male or female, or as you know, as we'd like to say, not non-binary, or kind of more inclusive for everybody.
Right, okay, we might want to come back to that. Perhaps we could move on, because I know we're a bit short of time. In terms of, do you accept what's been said in terms of the misogyny, racism,
yes, I do.
homophobia?
And I think different services are in different positions in terms of how far they are down that road. So, you know, it's going to be a fairly long journey for some, and it's a shorter journey for others. But
why is that?
I think there's a historical piece to it. I think there's the effect of localism, some of the ways fire and rescue services are funded. So some of the changes that, and your ability to be able to resource some things. I don't mean things like changing your policy straightforward, but being in a position to be able to, you know, update facilities is going to be different for different fire and rescue services. And in terms of the journey of, I suppose, making sure that everybody feels included and can bring their whole selves to work. Some people's policies are far in advance. And what we're trying to do as part of the NFCC is to just get to a position where we are creating things once, sharing it widely and taking advantage of it, so we can bring those services on that are you know, a little bit further behind, or in some cases significantly further behind.
Okay, Mr. MacDougall.
Yeah, I think it's a as a service that's just completed a cultural review, we haven't found any significant evidence of institutional misogyny, homophobia within our service, or racism. However, I'm very alive to the fact that that doesn't mean we don't have issues. We are looking at, from a systemic point of view, we're looking for that external verification, so making sure we're getting external support. So again, linking into the Race Equality Code, linking into the White Ribbon Charity, linking into Stonewall to get support for understanding how we can ensure that.
Did you say Stonewall?
I did, yes.
Okay, yeah.
And understanding how our policies and procedures support what we're trying to achieve in becoming a more inclusive fire and rescue service.
Okay. Right, Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly alarmed by what I've heard so far. So we've had, in terms of what the extent of the problem is, from you, Ms. Billing, that because of the lack of inclusivity of people with tattoos and the absence of prayer rooms is a definition of some of the problems that you've got. Mr. Johnston, you've just said in response to why there are differential ways in which various fire services seem to be responding to this problem, that it's down to localism and funding, which I don't quite understand. And you've just said, Mr. MacDougall, that there is no evidence of institutional misogyny, racism or homophobia. And yet all the reports that have been published by Afzal Nazir into the Met and other reports into individual fire services reveal a serious cultural problem, certainly of misogyny and degrees of racism, which appears to be completely at odds of your assessment of the problem or the lack of a problem that you actually have. Do you not see that there appears to be, by all the studies that have been carried out externally and internally, that there is a culture problem within the fire service akin to what has been exposed within the Metropolitan Police, and providing a few more prayer rooms and allowing a few more people with tattoos to join the service is only the tip of the iceberg of the problems? Are you underestimating the problem, Ms. Billing, as to what you're supposed to be tackling? You are the lead on diversity and inclusion for the fire brigade across the country.
Thank you for your summary of what we said. So there's two different points for me. One was the question raised by the chair, which Nazir raised, which is around institutional racism, homophobic, transphobic, ableism, all of the different characteristics. And that is down to policies, procedures, facilities, and the way in which we kind of go about business. But what you're referencing there is culture. So my answer is yes, we absolutely recognise that we do have a cultural problem. And what are we doing about it? As Justin was saying, what we're doing as a National Fire Chiefs Council is trying to identify we are identifying the good practices that we're trying to put in place so that we can ensure that we move forward as a sector. There are elements of good practice that we've been working on through National Fire Chiefs Council, like the direct entry scheme, like the cultural dashboard, like the challenging behaviour toolkit. We now run supervisory development leadership programmes, middle leadership programmes, executive leadership programmes, and the list goes on. So there is a lot of work that has been done and is being done to progress the culture change, but also the institutional parts, which is much more directly related to policies, procedures, and the facility improvements. And Justin was right. I look at my service. I'm very lucky. I'm a council-run organisation, and they've been able to direct some capital investments so I can make those improvements. But we're all in different positions.
So, what has changed over the last year or two since all these reports started to emerge? I mean, in Cornwall, probably difficult. It's slightly ironic because Cornwall is one of the geographically least diverse parts of the United Kingdom. It's just a statement of
but we have
fact.
our
So what have you done differently there? Because you've got a bigger challenge, perhaps, to become more diverse in Cornwall than in metropolitan boroughs.
But we have our problems, and I terminated the employment of 5 of our firefighters, back before some of these reports came out, actually, for all the things that we're talking about. Absolutely abhorrent behaviour, absolutely disgusting use of discrimination and harassment. So, we've been taking those steps prior to these reports. However, what these reports have done and what the brave people have done that have stepped forward, and actually the likes of Paul that's here today, raising the profile, and this committee, what this has done has absolutely allowed us to elevate it to the level that it should be at. Because what we need to be doing is treating cultural competence and our policies and procedures with the same level that we do our operational competence and our operational policies and procedures. So thank you to everyone that has raised that profile, and please keep that profile going, because operational competence is just as important as cultural competence.
Okay, so in Cornwall, how many people have been dismissed for any of the things we've been talking about so far in the last couple of years? How long have you been in post in Cornwall?
I've been in post since May 2021.
Okay, so over that time, how many fire officers have been dismissed?
Not just, I want to say it's not just kind of fire officers that have dismissed, because we're talking about the whole of our organisation. So we've, I can get back to you, but we have definitely dismissed 7 people.
Out of how many people do you employ?
577.
Okay, so do you anticipate there could be a lot more dismissals?
I think it's fair to say we will deal with those cases as they come up, but I'll make it really clear if people are demonstrating those behaviours, and we will absolutely take the appropriate action, as I have already done so.
Of those 7, were any of them dismissed for criminal activity?
No.
So it's purely behavioural discipline matters within the service, their job within the service.
I'm happy to come back to the committee, because I will double check that if you don't mind.
No, obviously people need to be dismissed because there's been criminal activity, yes, which is not compliant with them carrying on being fire officers. I understand that. What the problem is, those people who've got this cultural problem, whether it's misogyny, racism or whatever, how you, one, identify them, who's responsible for that, and 2, what procedures are then in place to deal rigorously with them in terms of, right, you now have to go on a course of training in certain behaviours or whatever, or no, that's an instant dismissal case or what. So who is being the whistle overseeing the whistleblowers effectively? Who's encouraging the whistleblowers? Where is the disciplinary procedures? How does it work? If you got wind that station down in the tip of Cornwall, you've lost several female firefighters in the last few years, clearly for other reasons other than they had to move on, or you have no black firefighters in that fire station because it's got a reputation or whatever. How are you now scrutinising that much more closely than perhaps was happening before your time and before all this became an issue?
So first thing I'd say, I would absolutely hope that it wouldn't be we lost people over a few years and then identified that trend, because what we have in place are those kind of, those exit interviews. So I'm hoping that we would identify that a lot sooner. So basically, we now have in place, trends so that we can start to see patterns of behaviour. We're very different in the fact that we are quite a small service. So there tends to be a lot more face-to-face conversations. That's kind of, from senior managers down to kind of crew managers. So like you said, the term I think you used was we are likely to get wind of things. But there are also independent reporting lines that we've brought in since this, because we recognise that people, especially in close-knit communities and kind of team working and watch-based working, people might not feel comfortable. So, we've collectively introduced independent reporting lines as well. So as well as our whistleblowing, as well as our ongoing kind of disciplinary processes, we've also got independent reporting lines.
How many whistleblower complaints have you had in the last 3 years?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Rough ballpark, do you think? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Is it?
It has gone up since I've come into post, and like I said, took that action.
Are we talking still single figures?
No, we're talking just in double figures, yeah.
Just in double figures. So
we'll have to get back to you on the exact figures.
That again, when we challenge, it's not just the fire service over whistleblowing. Quite often the response is, "Oh yes, we've got a whistleblowing policy, and we've had very few reports," which suggests to me that the whistleblowing policy isn't working very well. And when you've had such a high-profile issue as this has been, primarily with the police, but then with the fire service, that probably has gone more under the radar than the police have, and there hasn't been a big hike in whistleblowing complaints, where clearly there are lots of things to whistleblow about. It suggests to me that the whistleblowing system, and your force may be no different to others, is not very effective and doesn't have the confidence of people to use it.
No, and I think what you'll probably hear coming out in the HMI thematic review is actually, I think we hear a lot about fear of reprisal. People don't like to speak up. But actually what we're finding, and we've got evidence of this in our own service, is they don't want the stigma of being a grass. That's the term that they use. So again, when we're going back to, I think, the original question, which is around culture, we've got a lot of work to do about you're not being a grass at all. Again, if you saw a firefighter not doing a check properly on their breathing apparatus set, you'd call it out. So how can we get to a position where actually it's the right thing to do to say, you shouldn't be saying that, or you shouldn't be doing that. And actually it's about education. It's about calling it out and supporting people so that we're not sat here where we've got really horrible cases of people that have been really hurt, and the significant impacts. We need to get to a point where we're educating people to understand, but also we're able to kind of call it out, and that's brave, not being brass.
Final question. I'm sorry I've concentrated on you, but you are the lead on all of this. So in your own service, how many women are there employed across the fire service now?
So we've got 41, which is just over 7%.
And what proportion of new recruits in the last year have been women?
So in the last 12 months, we've had a higher proportion than we've ever had before. We actually had one course that we ran, which usually has kind of 12 people, and we have more women on that course than men.
Okay, but what does that work out in percentage? I mean, because the problem is, as we know, that even if you take on all women for the next few years, that 7% figure is going to take some time to come because the turnover within the fire service is quite low, certainly much lower than the police. So my fire service in West Sussex, where we have a fantastic chief fire officer in Sabrina Hatton-Cohen, we have 8% women, but 20% of recruits last year were women, but it's still going to take that time. Are you similar sorts of levels then?
Yeah, we're over the 20%.
You're over 20%?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
we've got a whole-time recruitment this year, so quite looking forward to that one. So we're predominantly on call, which I think is the same as West Sussex.
Okay, Lee Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, please, for Councillor Rebecca Knox. I think you was in agreement that your force was institutionally racist. Is that correct?
I agreed with the report, the independent report, and so did the Chief Fire Officer accept the findings of that
can you
report.
please tell me, Councillor, what unfair advantages white people have in your force?
I would hope none. Not advantages. Did I hear you
Do they have
correctly?
any advantages?
No.
So then how can you be institutionally racist?
Sorry, I might have to get back to you.
No, you
no.
don't. You've said your force was institutionally racist, yet white people
Misogynist and
yet white people have no advantage at all.
yes.
So how can it be racist?
Maybe I was interpreting the phrase of it as a whole, as a phrase that Nazir summed up. But I would absolutely stand by that the force was not racist, but going back to the way that it was described.
I'm sorry. You said you agreed that your force was institutionally racist. So now I'm asking you, how is it racist? What advantages do white people have in your force?
And I'm saying that there are no advantages.
So then it can't be racist.
Can I just interrupt at this point? Because the inquiry that was held into Dorset and Wiltshire, that was around misogyny and sexism. I think what I was referring to, Lee, was the quote that we were given in the last session, which was more generally about institutional racism, homophobia. So I think perhaps, Councillor, you might just want to reflect on what the inquiry was that you were concerned with and be clear on that.
Yes, of course. And yes, it was focused on culture, but I do see issues that affect the culture of racism as important. We do have some extremely good officers who in our service who are really good role models for the service. Okay. One in particular, Sam Allison, who received the King's Fire Services Medal this year, and he is the second black football referee in the Premiership. And he is an excellent role model for
just one more question, Chair. Just try and nail this down. What group of people in your force have an unfair advantage in their employment?
I think what the independent report and our previous report identified was that we needed more safe spaces for females and others to be able to call out where they were experiencing unfortunate and bad behaviour within the workplace. We have put in some processes which will allow for that. We've got a Safe To campaign, which means that individuals can find exactly the type of assistance and practical help they need in order to address the concerns of misconduct within the workplace.
I get that, but I didn't ask
Thank
that.
you.
I didn't ask that. I asked which group of people have an unfair advantage within your force.
And I'm sorry, I was just trying to say to you that I think perhaps the females and others who haven't felt that they could call out and speak out in a safe space were disadvantaged, but now we are addressing that. We're not complacent to the fact that was a need which was identified in the independent report that was commissioned.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn Harris.
Yeah, Councillor Knox, can we go back on some of the things that you just said? Tell me a little bit about how the procedures work. So if someone has got a complaint, you've already said that you wouldn't actually speak to them. Why?
Because I'm an elected member of the Fire Authority, therefore I have the governance role over the service and holding the Chief Fire Officer to account. but actually the responsibility of ensuring that the procedures about addressing misconduct at those levels would be down to the operational staff.
Okay, so have you got a team of people who work for you?
Well, they work for the Chief Fire Officer, and yes, there are teams of people who...
And did they try to contact the people?
Oh, yes.
And did they feed back to you what...
Absolutely.
And you still didn't feel the need to go and speak to the victims after you were fed back on just exactly how dreadful they were feeling about everything?
I wouldn't have been... the victims would not be identified, as Kath was saying earlier. Some of the issues that are facing the Fire and Rescue Service is sometimes victims don't want to be identified because of the culture in some places, which is quite negative. But what me and my authority would get fed back to is the number of cases, and what I've asked for now, and the Chief Fire Officer is absolutely in favour of knowing more about the type of case. I wouldn't be able, and nor could my authority, know who, because they could be identified, and that would not be a good thing for the individuals who didn't want to be identified. But the type of matter that might be under scrutiny would be fed back. Did the
Chief Fire Officer ever tell you that they had concerns, that there were things going on, and you still didn't feel the need to intervene in any way?
The Chief Fire Officer did tell me. We have a regular meeting. The Chief Fire Officer, and I use that space to have frank and very honest discussions about what he doesn't have to tell me, but he does. And then we discuss the ways and means by which the matter might be solved within the service. And that is my role.
Retrospectively, do you think that you were rather naive to believe that you didn't need to do more, given the fact that we know from other frontline services like the Met Police, for example, the kinds of culture that were there and the historical culture that were there, it was highly likely it was going to be going on within the fire service, which you had some level of responsibility for, and yet didn't think to have a review into the culture? Or
may I? We did have a review into the culture. The Chief Fire Officer, as soon as in 2018, when the HDMI FRS started the their inspections, every single report that has come out from the other 43 Fire and Rescue Services has been looked at by the team within Dorset and Wiltshire in order to learn from the good and the bad, and to ensure that our what we can improve on and what we can share with others, which might be good practice to help them improve, would be put in place. And also, the day after the London Fire Brigade independent report came out, a gap analysis against our service was conducted, with taking in staff feedback, representative bodies feedback, underrepresented body networks. So a thorough review was underway and was cross-referenced within the report that Alex Johnston and her team did starting in February 2023, reporting back in October. And between that time, the members of the Fire Authority, there are 18 of us elected members, were receiving that feedback in a space that was confidential, in order for us to ensure and hold the Chief Fire Officer to account, to ensure that the report was being conducted in the independent way and as thorough as it possibly could. We really wanted the team to get the independent team to reach out, not to wait for the telephone to go, but to pick up the phone. This was a reaching out and really,
I think,
really
Councillor
going
Knox,
into the...
Can I just gently say to you that the only reason you had that independent review was because of the exposure of what was going on in your fire service by the media.
Yeah.
That's the only reason you did that. Can we be clear on that? That wasn't you thinking, oh, we'll do this because I think there might be a problem. You were forced to do it because of the expose in the media. Let's be clear, please.
If I may,
Caroline Harris.
If I may reply?
Well, that's correct, isn't it? I'm not saying...
No, I don't agree it was.
You were going to do that anyway?
The independent review was commissioned by the Chief Fire Officer
Yes, after the media.
After the media attention.
There were known cases. They weren't identified by the media, but...
Councillor Knox, that was the point I was trying to make. If there were known cases, why did it take a television exposure on the practices of the fire authority that you were the chairperson for in order for you to have this independent inquiry? Isn't it a case of you are not sorry for what had happened, but you're sorry that you got caught?
Absolutely not. It was commissioned because some issues were raised by the media. Some were known about and some were being acted on.
If they were known about, why hadn't you acted on them earlier?
They had been not acted on. There was one case that...
One?
No, I'm just, if I may, there was I'll give you an example of something that was reported on in the media, which was there was an allegation of photographs being taken at road traffic collisions of victims. This was a surprise. But I can tell you that the day that we were informed by the media that had come forward, we sent it to Dorset Police and Wiltshire Police. They conducted a thorough inquiry and found there was no evidence.
Can I just concern myself with your responsibility for your fire service, okay? Those reports were a surprise, and I'm delighted to hear that. But on your own admission, you knew there were things happening, and yet you did nothing about it.
No, that is incorrect. That we knew of incidents and cases, and they were acted on through the process. I wouldn't have individually got involved. That would not have been appropriate as the chairman. But we had our team.
You can't have the role that you had and not be involved. That's the whole point of your role. You have to oversee this fire authority, so you can't pick and choose the bits which are going to be good. You've got to look at it all and take responsibility for it all. It's the back stops, and that was your job. You were that back. You were the wall. It stopped with you. You had the responsibility to the people in that fire service to make sure that their welfare, their concerns, the way that they were treated, their working conditions, everything else, that fell on you.
Operationally, the chief fire officer is the one who has the delegation to ensure that those processes are in place.
You should have held them to account.
And I hold the chief fire officer to account, and that is through a very thorough governance process which is laid out.
Let me rephrase this. Retrospectively, how do you personally feel about what we now know occurred in that fire service? Have you got any remorse? Have you attempted to contact any of the victims? Do you feel that you were remiss in the way that you dealt with this?
I feel the great sadness for the fire service to have this
No, I'm asking,
culture.
how do you feel about the role that you played?
I personally feel responsible because I really care about the fire and rescue service. I would not have been in the position I am in for the length of time with the passion that I care about the service. I really, really want to do the right thing, and so does the chief fire officer.
Would you do the right thing and actually meet the people who were making the complaints?
Again, I am not in a position to be able to contact victims who have...
If they contacted you?
If they contacted me, I would absolutely would like to understand and hear and listen to what
so you can make that public statement now that any victim who wants to come and talk to you and express their concerns, you were willing to listen to them.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Can I just say, have you expressed publicly any concern about the victims, any remorse, any apology, any saying I'm sorry? Has that ever happened?
I've spoken up at fire authority meetings about...
Publicly, though, because the only quote I've got from you is supporting the chief.
Yeah.
I think from memory, on the occasion where we were reporting to the fire authority, then, of course, there was that determination. I hope you can...
No, I'm just asking you, have you ever said to the victims, I'm sorry?
I hope I have.
But you're not sure you have?
I'm reflecting on the number of times I've spoken in public. because I do speak in...
You responded with a statement, because I do need to move on, but you did respond with a statement that said, you have every confidence the Chief Fire Officer will take action. In my role as the Chair of the Fire and Rescue Authority and elected members through the Finance and Audit Committee will hold the Chief to account and scrutinise the delivery of the resulting action plan. That statement came after the independent review, which found an underlying culture of misogyny and sexism. So nothing about victims, nothing about the culture. You're just saying you've got full confidence in the Chief.
That was the time, I believe, Madam Chair, at the time of the publication of the report.
Yes.
It was earlier on when we made the public statement that the Chief was going to commission the independent
what you
report.
said then, I'm worried about the victims.
I didn't say I was worried. I said that I apologise for the situation that we have found ourselves in. Sorry, I can't remember exactly the wording, but...
Okay, thanks. Okay, Kim Johnston.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, panel. I've got a couple of questions for the fire chiefs. At our last session, it was stated that the buck stops with the fire chiefs in the services. And I just wanted to know, particularly in terms of Mr. Dougal and your role as the executive of the People Programme, what does that actually entail, and what have you actually done in terms of changing the culture within your particular fire service?
Okay, thank you. So I think there's 2 points there. If you don't want to speak about the National Fire Chiefs Council work and how that supports Chief Fire Officers, and then I'll speak about what I've done within my service, if that's okay.
Fine.
So we've shared with the panel the Culture Action Plan. So again, following the first kind of report which has come through most recently from the London Fire Brigade, the National Fire Chiefs Council looked very closely at all the work that it was doing, and we've been doing a lot of work over quite a long period of time to support services in how they deal with cultural change within their organisations. And again, within that report that we've provided to you, you'll see all the work that we are doing to support. And Chief Officer Billing has talked to some of that work already. So again, we're making sure that we're supporting Chief Fire Officers to bring about culture change in their services. We have another cultural event in July, and we're currently releasing those products. Some of those things we've talked about, which is about supporting around that challenging behaviour, so making sure that everyone in the service can speak out again when they see behaviour which isn't appropriate, and how we support that. And again, also some of that work around what does success look like. So looking at how we produce the right measures for services to recognise where they are in that cultural improvement journey. And again, that's about making sure we can learn from each other and we can support each other as we drive cultural change within the service. As a Chief Fire Officer in Oxfordshire, we've recently undertaken a cultural review, which has landed in the last couple of weeks, and from that we've pulled out lots of actions, and it's a significant action plan we're going to deliver over the next 12 months and going into a second year to make sure we can improve that culture across our service. We have, as I've said, we are looking for that external verification on some of our policies and procedures through accreditation by various organisations to make sure we are driving cultural change to improve that culture change.
I just asked though, in terms of your role as the National Chief Fire Council, how confident you are that all 44 services are taking this on board and are looking at constructively making significant changes to culture within the organisation, because we were led to believe, or we weren't led to believe, we were told at the last session that there's an inconsistent approach in terms of the different fire services. So
I'm confident that all 50 fire and rescue services see cultural change as a priority within their organisations. And the work we're doing is to try and drive consistency in that approach. As a National Fire Chiefs Council, it's about supporting services to drive consistency, to make sure we understand what is best practice. So as we, as services introduce initiatives into their services, how do we understand how they're working and how they're improving elements? And again, from a National Fire Chiefs Council point of view, we're supporting services with doing that. Examples of that will be, we have got a conversation through the National Fire Chiefs Council at the end of March where we'll be discussing that positive practice that services have been implementing. We also have an event which is being held by the Inspectorate, which is coming at the end of May, which will look at the positive practice that's come out of the Inspectorate's cultural thematic review. So again, making sure we're identifying that positive practice, making sure we understand how it is improving culture, and we're sharing that amongst fire and rescue services.
Mr. Johnston?
Thank you. Well, in Lancashire, I'll speak from Lancashire's perspective, we've been on this cultural journey now for about 10 years. And it is a constant journey, and we still have issues that we have been working through. When we first started, we introduced a set of values that the organisation worked on for themselves and implemented them. And within about 2 years, I'll be honest, they've gone stale. They'd sat on a shelf and they were forgotten about. And what we realised, what we hadn't done, is we hadn't integrated it into absolutely everything we do. We hadn't integrated it into recruitment and selection. We hadn't integrated it into promotion processes. We hadn't put it into appraisal processes so people understood and actually could be taken through the disciplinary channels for not actually behaving to the set of standards that we all agree that we should. And that journey over time we've been able to supplement and introduce leadership training and how to have difficult conversations with people, how to have the authentic conversations, and to call things out where they're inappropriate. That doesn't mean we still don't have issues. So we had 26 investigations this year. The year prior to that, I think we had about 18. That you can take from that some people are more confident to come forward now, which is what we want. We want people to be knowing what's right and what's wrong, happy to identify it, and I know from our reviews that 90% of our staff feel they are confident to be able to speak out. Some of them, a bit like Kathryn said earlier, they're confident to speak out, but they still worry about being ostracised or reprisals, which makes them less likely. So particularly if you do get something like a bullying and harassment case, where often there may not be physical evidence in terms of WhatsApp conversations, which seems to be a significant modern thing, but where you've got to go and talk to people. We do still find it unfortunate in some circumstances where people that would have seen something or heard something, it turns out by the time they're interviewed, they haven't seen something and they haven't heard something. And I'm hoping that some of the things that will be drawn out of the misconduct review by the HMICFRS and published in June will give us some of the evidence base to start driving some of that forward more thoroughly across the whole of NFCC, because people need to be comfortable to stand up and be an ally. In my own fire and rescue service now, we are, put my glasses back on, I think 10.4% female. My last recruitment process of 35 people has generated 40% women candidates, and 60% male candidates, 17% BAME candidates. So it's an improvement journey for all of us, and it's a really difficult one, but we're committed to taking it on.
You're recruiting, but I just wanted to know how well are you in terms of retaining those officers and promoting those officers, and maybe say a little bit about your statement earlier on where you agreed that there was institutional racism and misogyny, and if any staff members have lost their job as a result of that.
Okay. In terms of retaining, we have very low numbers of leavers, so statistically it's very difficult for us to draw that at that level. Again, through the HMI misconduct review, we're hoping to get to a standardised national set that's anonymised that will tell us more information. But we do exit interviews with every people. And after the initial review into London, we actually went out again and reviewed those, and just to check that the people, for the reasons that they said they left when they left, was there anything more to it, so we could assure ourselves. But our numbers are very, very small in terms of leavers, so it's difficult to ascertain from that. In terms of people being dismissed, over the past 2 years, and I'm pulling figures from my mind, but it's probably about 1 or 2 people a year that will be dismissed in relation to those behaviours. But I'll be happy to write to the panel and confirm them.
Kathryn, just in terms of the inspection process, so we heard again at the last session that a lot of services, achieved a good inspection, a bit like Dorset got a good inspection. However, there's all this misogyny going on. So how confident are you that the inspection regime is effective enough in terms of highlighting and dealing with this culture that is endemic within services?
I think the thematic, I think that, you know, the HMI calling for the thematic was recognition of the fact that probably the pillar, or the three areas, efficiency, effectiveness and people, probably don't do that deep dive sufficiently. So that thematic inspection around misconduct was targeted specifically for that, and that I was one of the services that went through that inspection, and I would say that does give me assurance, and I certainly welcome and look forward to seeing the outcome of that report. One thing I would say though is, you know, I think as a panel, you've obviously spoken to a lot of groups of people individually, and we ask ourselves, you know, why haven't we been able to crack this before? And I think one thing I've absolutely reflected on is what you probably see now that you haven't seen before is a joint approach to this. You know, you've got the National Fire Chiefs Council, you've probably got, you know, and I've said to you before, you know, I've been bullied, I've been discriminated against. You've now got leaders that are in positions. We're in these positions because we want to make a difference, because we've been, you know, the receivers of those types of behaviours. So you've now got committed chiefs, you've got yourselves with, you know, holding us to kind of that scrutiny. We've got the Fire Brigade Union, we've got the HMI, we've got AFSA, we've got the Women in the Fire Service, we've got the UK Fire Pride Network. So we've got the Inclusive Fire Services group, I nearly forgot that group. So, you know, there are a lot of people that are going, this is really important. But what I would always say is that it's important right here, right now, but it needs to be important for, you know, for forever. As I said before, operational competence we see as an absolute priority that never ever wavers, and our cultural competence and improvement needs to be there as well. So long may that partnership and us working together continue, because we won't get there unless on our own. But thank you.
Councillor, do you know how many staff members have taken constructive dismissal against Dorset Fire Services because of the failure of the service to support them while they were there?
I don't, I'm afraid. I can get back to you with those details. I'm sorry not to be able to reply today.
Okay, thank you. Simon Philp.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me. Do you track, this is for the fire chiefs, I suppose, do you track employee staff sentiment? Are you measuring the impact of having whistleblowing lines in place, and whether your teams have got trust in the transparency of those procedures, that they'll be listened to? Whoever wants to go first.
If I go first? Yes, absolutely. And every 2 years we'll also do a full survey, independently run. We ask specific questions around things like that, so we can understand the impact that we're having and the confidence that people have got. I won't say that's universal, but it will be through the cultural dashboard work that we're doing through the NFCC, a product that everybody will be able to draw down upon.
And you're seeing an increase in confidence?
Yes, yes, I've got my figures from my recent one that show that there is a marked increase in confidence.
Slightly different in Cornwall. We know that the independent reporting lines and our reporting lines work because they are being used, but we do not at the moment, until we implement the cultural dashboard, do that kind of trust and confidence rating, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, so we are currently going through an annual staff survey, which we do, which again tracks all of those feelings of confidence. We have got, as part of our independent culture review, there's a recognition that we're seeing improving behaviours over the last 12 months, but we will be using things like pulse surveys to really kind of track elements of how we're seeing that improvement. The work we've done nationally on the culture dashboard it's been really interesting work to understand how is the best way to track cultural improvement in any organisation. And we have looked far and wide to other sectors, to other services, actually internationally, to see how others are doing it, to try and develop the best practice we can to support services that is setting up the right information to be able to show that culture improvement journey. It does need, there is the quantitative data that we can go into, which again you'd expect us to do around kind of workforce data, but actually what we recognise is that survey and that qualitative understanding of how the kind of employee experience and how people feel is really important in understanding how we're improving across our services.
Thank you. This is a slightly lazy analogy, but I'll make it anyway. When we've been looking at the police, one of the things that we've seen in standards there is, it certainly helps to have those hotlines, the ability for people to whistle blow and point out when there are challenges in the environment they're working in. But they also need to have confidence that where people are in employment already, there is the retrospective checking going on, and that's been a really tricky piece of work for certainly the Met to lean into, but some of the other forces we've looked at as well. So that sort of standards and vetting piece where they might have missed red flags, where warning signs weren't picked up. Are you doing that sort of retrospective work as well to provide reassurance to the people within your teams that actually no stone's going unturned, that you're not just waiting for someone to come forward? Actually, there is a bit of proactivity here.
Just on that, actually, that was so around the vetting and the DBS checking, that was a piece of work that was driven by the National Fire Chiefs Council that saw the kind of the law passed in July last year. But I know Justin wanted to go and come in on the piece.
Pretty much what I was going to say.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
You're jumping at the bit.
retrospectively now, we're working backwards through staff groups. You've got 35,000 people potentially going through that. It's going to take a little bit of time. I'm about halfway through on my fire and rescue service staff, and then we're looking at that in a pretty much a standardised approach that's been agreed through NFCC safeguarding about how we'll approach what will turn out to be disclosures to us around safeguarding, and whether those disclosures should have already been made to us on recruitment. So we're working our way through that now.
And you're all on a similar journey there, are you?
Yes.
So, yeah.
The only difference I would add from my personal service, because we're part of a county council fire and rescue service, we have had safeguarding and that vetting in place for a much longer time, because it was raised through adult social care colleagues that it was a requirement for us to have. And in some cases we're having to look at, are we where we're doing enhanced checks, is that appropriate? But we are vetting our staff and making sure. And I'd also like to add that there's a lot of work going on to look at disclosures from police services, to making sure that our police colleagues, when things are getting raised, whether it's appropriate for them to raise it with us directly, so we get that early indication that action is being taken against them from a policing point of view.
And I think, Justin, you said you were halfway through. Do you have an estimate? So I'll ask this for all of you. Do you have an estimate for when that retrospective vetting will be completed?
Only in so much as we've been running it for about 4 months now, so potentially another 4 months maybe.
That's the same. Okay.
From my perspective, I'm confident all my staff have been appropriately vetted.
I can't give you a timescale, but I'm happy to report back.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that if possible. And just in terms of outputs from that, have you seen people dismissed as a result?
Difficult to know from the data. I've got the exact data. It's difficult to know from that because it says some people have left prior to the finishing the vetting process. But most things tend to be fairly low level and historical, and there is, like I said, there's a process to work through whether that person presents a risk.
Okay, I think we do have the Minister waiting, so I think we're going to have to move on. There were just a couple of things that I wondered if you could write to me about. First of all, I wanted to ask each of the fire chiefs, if you use non-disclosure agreements in your force, in your service, could you write to me and let me know if you do use NDAs? Could you also write to me and let me know whether you use 360-degree reviews? That would be very helpful. And just finally, the Fire Brigade Union, when we questioned them about the representation that they provided to firefighters, they've said they can't give us any information about how many people they've represented, and they've suggested we ask the fire chiefs and the Minister about that. Do you have any data about representation from trade union, or from the FBU in particular, in any disciplinary or misconduct? Would you be able to write to me about that as well, if you have that information?
Yes.
I have to say, I am rather surprised the FBU are not able to provide that themselves, but they've said that they don't have that information.
Sorry, that's clarity. So on how many cases
how many they represent, really, because one of our questions to them was about representing people, firefighters, fire officers, where there are allegations of bullying and intimidation, because they have a specific policy, they told us, that they will not always represent those people. So we wanted to get some data about that and understand how that policy works. But just generally, I think we wanted just to have information about the number of times the FBU represent in disciplinary misconduct, just to understand the level of that.
Thank you.
Can I thank you very much for your attendance today and the evidence you've given, and we will be producing a report hopefully before a general election. So thank you very much, and we'll now move to our second panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ask about what Andy Cook had said. You need to write to the Chiefs Council.
They're not represented.
No.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Did he? Minister, it's very good to see you, and I do apologise. We've had quite a packed morning. We've had a briefing with some of your officials in private to start off with, and then we've just had we've had a panel of 4 giving evidence, which there were lots of questions for, so I do apologise for keeping you waiting. Obviously, we know you, Minister, very well. You've been in front of us several times before, but I wondered if we could perhaps just hear from your colleague who's here, and if you could just like to introduce yourself and explain your role, that would be helpful.
Yes, of course. Good morning. I'm the Director for Fire and Major Events in the Home Office, with responsibility for fire safety, fire reform, fire resilience, and the Crown Premises Fire Safety Inspectorate.
Well, thank you very much for attending today. This is the second session we've had in looking at the culture of the Fire and Rescue Service. And I think the committee is very concerned about what we've heard from a number of people, actually. In our first session, we were hearing about some of the independent inquiries that have taken place. I just wondered, Minister, in fact, in the first session, there was a lot of compliments paid to you as a minister who was engaged, who was interested, who was looking at the Fire and Rescue Service. I think what we are very concerned about, though, is a culture that does not seem to be one that you would expect to see in any public service in 2024. Harks back more to life on Mars, 1970s at times, the way people are spoken to or treated. Just what are your reflections on what you've come across so far as the Minister responsible?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity of appearing before the committee again today. So I think there are cultural problems that need to be addressed, and I've discussed this repeatedly with a number of people in the fire system, from Mark Hardingham, who's the chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council, Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, and many chief officers. And I've repeated this message in a number of kind of public forums that I've spoken at. I think it's very important that not just at the top, because in a sense the culture at the top is relatively easier to fix once chief fire officers understand change is needed. And I hope you've seen in your evidence that I think most if not all chief fire officers do now accept that. They may not have done as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, but I think they do now. That the challenge with changing culture is to move beyond just that cadre of chief fire officers and cascade that change of culture to treat colleagues with respect and so on, right the way through to the front line. And the real test of whether a culture has changed or not is at 2 o'clock in the morning, when there's a watch working together on a fire station and there's no senior supervisor around. It's just the watch commander and the frontline firefighters, no one else. And if something happens, if someone is made the subject of unacceptable abuse of some kind, does that get called out? Does it get called out by the watch commander? But even more importantly, does it get called out by the other firefighters, other frontline firefighters? And until we can say with certainty, the answer to that question is almost always yes, it will get called out at 2 o'clock in the morning in that frontline fire station when no one else is watching or looking. Only when we can say yes with confidence has the culture truly changed. And I think that is a... You
don't have that confidence at the moment.
I think that is a journey they're on. I don't think they've yet reached the destination. I think a lot of progress has been made in the last 2 or 3 years. It's certainly accepted at the very senior levels of the fire service, but I think more work needs to be done to meet the test I just set out. And that is ultimately, I think, the test of whether a culture has changed. And cascading that down through the whole organisation is the challenge that the leadership have to deliver.
Can I just refer to what Andy Cook has said to the committee? He says there's been some good progress with services overall, but I'm concerned that they are often too slow to make changes following our reports. And he says that they've gone, we've commenced our third full round of inspections in February 23. They've published 15 reports. We have still found too many instances of unacceptable behaviours and have issued the following to those 15 services in relation to values and culture, the 15 that they've inspected. Requires improvement or inadequate grades to 5 services and cause of concern to 2 services. It's not exactly a glowing recommendation that things are moving at the pace that we all want them to, is it?
I think I would broadly, and obviously I've discussed this with Andy Cook repeatedly. I meet Andy Cook on fire and police matters on an almost weekly basis. In fact, he's probably sick of the sight of me, I would imagine. So I think I'd broadly agree with his analysis. I think there has been progress. I mean, the London Fire Brigade is a good example of that, where the Commissioner, Andy Rowe, has made enormous progress following the Nazir Asfal report. He's really gripped it and brought about positive change, and they've obviously come recently, just last month in fact, out of the Engage process. And there's been good work done in Manchester as well, which received a good rating just recently. So there has definitely been progress, but I would agree with Andy Cook that there is more to do, and he's obviously given you the figures around that.
And I also just wanted to ask you, he also says to us there's a worrying trend has arisen during our third round of inspections. We are seeing increasing instances of services attempting to unduly influence the inspection process. This includes services selecting specific members of staff ahead of our reality testing and briefing them on the answers in advance. What do you say about that?
Well, I read that on page 2 of his letter to the committee dated 12th of March, and I was very concerned to see that. That is completely unacceptable to try and game the system in that way. I was, however, reassured somewhat. I mean, they shouldn't be trying to do it in the first place, obviously, but I was slightly reassured by his next sentence, which said, to date, because of our vigilance and robust processes, these attempts have not been successful. So he has spotted it and stopped it, but they shouldn't be trying it in the first place. He has also made some changes following the Dorset and Wiltshire inspection, where he's now requiring chief fire officers of forces, or FRSs rather, being inspected to notify the inspectorate where there are significant misconduct processes ongoing, because one of the problems with the Wiltshire and Dorset and Wiltshire inspection was that they weren't fully aware of some of the investigations that were going on at the time. So that's a further change that should make it harder for FRSs to try and pull the wool over the inspector's eyes.
I find that very surprising, though, that was not given, that information was not given to the inspectorate when they were in Dorset and Wiltshire. And they rated that service as good, didn't they?
They did.
They didn't know that underlying culture of misogyny and sexism, which was then found in the independent report.
That's right. I mean, yes, I'm very surprised that that information wasn't provided. It definitely should have been provided by the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service to the inspector. I mean, the inspector who conducted that, as Andy Cook's letter says, was Wendy Williams, who this committee and you will obviously know very well, a very well-respected figure. They conducted, I think, interviews with 135 members of staff, about 10% of the workforce, but the issues weren't found. You're quite right, and that's why the changes I just mentioned have been made, because clearly just a short time later, the independent report did find the issues, and that's why the changes are made. I'm pleased that the inspectorate are going back in very soon to re-inspect Dorset and Wiltshire. They're going in on the 8th of April, so in just 2 or 3 weeks' time, they'll be back in there to check up on them again.
And that's good. And I'm going to come to Simon Fell next, but just before I do, I just wanted to ask you, I don't know if you were able to hear any of the evidence that we've just taken. We heard from the chair of the Fire and Rescue Authority in Dorset and Wiltshire as the governance arrangement for that fire and rescue service. I think a number of us on the committee were concerned about the lack of questioning or inquisitiveness, really, about what was going on in a service that that governance structure was supposed to oversee. Thank you. Do you think the governance structure that we have for fire and rescue services is actually fit for purpose? When you've got councillors who are obviously, elected and all of that, but don't seem to have any, just seem to take what a chief fire officer tells them as without questioning.
Well, so we do rely, obviously, collectively, the public, as well as Parliament, rely on the Fire and Rescue Authority as the oversight body to be inquisitive, to be appropriately sceptical, rather like a local version of a select committee in many ways. And I think we need them to discharge that function seriously and not just treat it as a sort of minor matter alongside their county council duties. That is one of the reasons why I do think actually that moving to having a police, fire and crime commissioner model, or have a combined mayor take responsibility, is a better model, because you have a single individual elected person, not a committee, but one person who is obviously accountable and who has a stronger incentive, therefore, to make sure it's sorted out. So we've got 5 or 6 now, PFCCs. So, for example, to take an example, in Essex, there's a PFCC, Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner Roger Hurst. There are others as well, obviously. And I know that those PFCCs probably take a very strong interest, as do the mayors of combined authorities, whether it's in Manchester or London or elsewhere. So I think that is a better model. Now, we're not, as you know, and as we discussed in our previous session, I think, we're not mandating transfers or changes from an FRA to a PFCC or combined mayor model, but we are encouraging it. And one of the reasons why, I think, is the point that you're making.
It seems to me there needs to be some training, actually. If you're not moving everyone onto that model, for the authorities that exist, there seems to be some training that's required to ensure that there is proper oversight.
And they need to take the responsibility seriously. This is not a sort of minor function that is an adjunct to county council duties. It is, as you've identified, it's a really important function. And if there is a problem, we are relying, as there was in Dorset and Wiltshire clearly, then we're relying on the Fire and Rescue Authority to act as the first line of defence against that. So it is a really important role. They need to take very, very seriously.
Thank you. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. I'm aware you're sat across two forces, or two services rather, who are experiencing real cultural challenges at the moment. I'd just be really interested in your reflections on that and what you're taking from the challenges that police have got, what you're learning from that and what you're bringing into your approach to how we change the culture within the fire service as well.
Thank you. Well, I think the first point is one I made earlier, that for cultural change to happen, you need everyone in the organisation, but particularly the front line, to really embrace it, understand it, and have the confidence to call out problems where they see it. And that's the same in any organisation, including actually private sector organisations. So the first sort of message I always give, and I've said this in sort of speeches to all of the chief fire officers and the Fire and Rescue Authorities, and I say the same thing to the National Police Chiefs Council as well, and PCCs. Their mission, for both services, their mission as leaders is to make sure, as I said to the Chair, at 2 o'clock in the morning, in a police station or a fire station, we know that the people on the front line are going to do the right thing with confidence. And that is the acid test of culture change. I think secondly, again, common to both, we need to create the systems which back that up. And that means things like when people blow the whistle or report something, it gets taken seriously, it's investigated independently, people have the confidence in the reporting system. It means we have proper inspections. Obviously, it's the same inspector for both. You've met Andy Cook. That's why we, for example, commissioned firstly a spotlight inspection, and then secondly a thematic inspection that's underway now into culture in the fire service. We've had similar inspections in policing to make sure someone independent is checking up on what's going on, and they know that's happening. Making sure the regulations are there. Now in policing, we have much more sort of nationally imposed regulations, partly because it's an office under the Crown, whereas a police officer is an office under the Crown, whereas firefighters are employees, so they're kind of different things. In policing, we have much more prescriptive national regulations on, for example, misconduct, what counts as misconduct, how a police officer gets dismissed. It's quite prescribed in national regulations and guidance, which we're in the process, by the way, of updating. Whereas in fire, it's much more devolved. It's up to each local FRA as employer to set those rules. We do have a core code of ethics that was introduced in 2021, and we're going to it's our intention to put that onto a statutory footing. But that's one of the main differences between the two. The office holders under the Crown with a lot of national regulation in police versus much more devolved, localised management for firefighters because they are employees. And that's a difference. That is the main difference between the two.
Can I thank you for that? Can I? One of the first things you said there was about being able to call out problems and act on them. So Andy Cook has made a recommendation that the Chief Inspector should not just be able to inspect but also enforce. Do you support that recommendation then?
So first of all, in terms of, just to answer the first bit of the question on people being confident to report, one of the recommendations that Andy Cook has made in the past was that by the 1st of October last year, there should be a confidential and independent way for staff to raise concerns and that there's a whistleblowing process. And I can confirm that all 44 fire and rescue services do now have that independent mechanism in place, which they didn't previously. That was an HMI CFRS recommendation. It's been implemented. That is really important to give people that confidence in reporting. On your second question, Andy Cook has made this sort of request in relation to both fire and policing. And, the inspectorate, the way our system is constructed, they're an inspector, not a regulator, which means they make recommendations. They don't have hard-edged powers to direct either a police force or a fire and rescue service to do X, Y or Z. Obviously, we take their recommendations seriously. We expect the police forces and fire services to as well. There are there are last resort Home Secretary powers to step in with either the police or fire if there is a really serious problem, if things are getting out of hand. I think in fire, I don't think that's ever been used, but it is there as a last resort. So we don't propose at present, to give the inspector powers to direct, but we do expect fire and rescue services and police forces to follow those recommendations, and we watch that very, very carefully indeed. And I'm sure Chief Constables and Chief Fire Officers are mindful of the Home Secretary's last resort power to use if necessary.
Thank you. You say you don't accept that at the moment. What's the process for reviewing that?
Andy Cook wrote his State of Policing report last year and made various sort of requests along those lines, which we considered. We discussed with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. We discussed it with the National Police Chief Councils. We've had similar consideration in relation to fire, and having considered it and discussed it quite widely, made some clarifications, but decided for the moment not to take it forward. But it's, I would never say never. It's the kind of thing you just keep under constant review, and you keep an eye on it the whole time.
Okay, thank you. And just last one for me, if that's okay, Chair. In the previous panel, I asked the fire chiefs around the process they're going through, where they are vetting existing staff, so going back through And one of the things that came up there was a number of people have left as a result of that process starting, either through retirement or for other reasons. So, of course, that doesn't come to a conclusion then at that point. I just wonder what thought you've given to those processes, and whether there's some mechanism to hold individuals like that to account where actually they should have been picked up in the past, either through bad behaviour, something that was missed through vetting. Do you think there's something more we should be doing in that space?
Well, we have to be hyper-vigilant about this, and that's why we introduced legislation in July of last year, July 2023, to expand the eligibility for background checks, including criminal record and police background checks on Fire and Rescue Authority employees, to make it so you could do more of those background checks. That is really important. I think the continuous vetting and re-vetting is important, both in fire and police, for the reason that you've set out.
Thank you.
Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, how confident are you that culture change will take place with regards to all of the actions that you've spoken about today? Because we've heard from previous sessions that nothing has changed in the last 30 to 40 years, because it is so endemic. So, how confident are you?
So I think change is in progress. I would certainly not say that it's completed by any stretch of the imagination, but I think change is in progress. I think in the last 2 years in particular, I think that process of change has started. It may well not have happened for the 28 years before that, but I think in the last 2 years, changes have started. I mean, I've already mentioned the example of the London Fire Brigade, which has changed, I think, very significantly in the last year or two under Commissioner Andy Rowe's leadership, to the point that it's come out of Engage, and they've made some really meaningful changes on the culture and behaviour and integrity point. Manchester's made a lot of progress as well, but I would say it's work in progress. It's not finished yet, for sure. We in government are trying to push everything we can. I've mentioned, for example, the Code of Ethics already. We've commissioned HMIC FRS, the Inspectorate, to do the thematic inspection that's currently in progress that I mentioned. We've given the National Fire Chiefs Council funding to create the tools and guidance necessary. Every time I talk to chief fire officers, I press this point. So we're pulling a number of levers, but just to be honest, it is work in progress. The job is not done yet.
You did mention earlier that for change to take place, it's very incumbent on the front line to be responsible for that. And given that you have mentioned that the responsibilities are devolved and there is a massive inconsistency in terms of how services are run, again, how confident are you that there will be that consistent culture change right across all of the services?
Well, that's a good question, and that's really what the thematic inspection is designed to get to the bottom of, to give me when there was questions asked about this in the House, on the floor of the House probably about 9 months ago, roughly, I immediately commissioned this thematic inspection to give some assurance about that, and I'm sure it's going to I'm sure get repeated again afterwards. So that is the best mechanism for checking up for us in Parliament and for me as a minister to check up on that consistency, the Inspectorate. But the Code of Ethics also sets out national standards, and as I say, we intend to set that onto a statutory footing, again to underpin the sort of consistency that I think we want to see.
Could I just add, Minister?
Of course,
and just to say, I think, as you heard from some of the chiefs, I was just reflecting on what Justin Johnston said about having put in place some values and then they'd sat on the shelf and nothing happened and they needed to go through a whole new process. So I think the sense that it needs a relentless focus, a sustained focus, and again, from the government's perspective, we will need to make sure that we also keep that focus and that we hold services, the NFCC, to account for making progress in these areas. So it's going to be a long run, I think.
Yeah, it is surprising just how far behind they are, or some of the services are. I just wanted to ask you, Minister, about when will the College of Fire and Rescue be established?
Yeah, so that was obviously announced in the government's response to the white paper we published in December. I would describe that as a process that's going to unfold over the coming years. To start with, we're going to be bolstering the work that's already being coordinated by the National Fire Chiefs Council to bulk up the work they're doing already in this area. But ultimately, this will require, to do it properly, I'm not saying they're not doing it properly, but to do it on a more expansive basis, let me choose my words more carefully, to expand it and to make it even better, will require, I think, additional funding. So that will be tied into the next spending review process that will happen in the course of the autumn. So in the short term, doing more work with the National Fire Chiefs Council. Into the medium term, it'll be a consequence of the next spending review.
Okay, so that's within the next 3 to 4 years if the spending review goes ahead and it's agreed?
Yes.
Okay. And then I just want to ask you about, there's no consequences currently for those who are going through the disciplinary process and who leave the service or retire. I think I'm directly referring to a case in Dorset and Wiltshire. What consideration has been given by the Home Office to looking at whether that should change? As I think you did with the police. So has there been any thought given to that? So
in relation to the police, if someone leaves the police, retires or resigns, they can still be subject to misconduct proceedings, and if they are found guilty of misconduct or gross misconduct, then they can be, obviously they've left already, but they can be barred, so they can't rejoin any police force. I'll ask Sarah just to expand on the position in relation to that for fire in a second. But obviously in relation to any employee, they can get fired, but if they've left and what they've done meets the criminal threshold, clearly they can be criminally investigated by the police. In terms of whether a retired or resigned firefighter can be investigated for misconduct and then barred, which is the case with the police, is that the case with fire?
So not at the moment. I'd just go back to the role of the FRA as the employer, and they would need to follow their employer arrangements for that. We have, though, asked HMIC-FRS, as you know, to do a thematic inspection into misconduct, and part of that is to see if there are any gaps and any things that we should be doing differently. So on receipt of that report, that will be an opportunity to reflect on whether more needs to be done in this space.
And that could include, potentially, I wonder, just thinking out loud, creating a barred concept. Now, given that if firefighters are employees, not officers under the Crown, that may be legal questions, but that could be one further reform, to introduce a barring concept if a firefighter is found guilty of misconduct after having left. That would be a possible reform.
I suppose the committee is quite concerned that in the Dorset and Wiltshire case, there was obviously a very senior officer in that that fire authority, fire service, who, as I understand it, over a number of years was behaving in a dreadful way. When finally there was some disciplinary action taken against him, he basically ducked out of it. And I assume he's retired on full pension with all the kind of rights that brings. And yet, no, he has never been held to account for what he inflicted on firefighters, women firefighters in that service. And I think that's disgraceful, isn't it, Minister?
So I think that lack of accountability is concerning. So I think we can consider the barring concept that I just mentioned. I don't want to sort of firmly commit to it because there may be legal issues because they're employees rather than officers of the Crown. But that is something we can certainly take away and consider. Clearly, if the conduct met the criminal threshold, then police investigation is the right thing. In relation to pension forfeiture, again, we do have that with the police, but that normally follows criminal conviction. The threshold is criminal conviction of a nature which constituted typically abuse of their power as an officer. It's a relatively high threshold, but it certainly only follows criminal, or generally follows criminal convictions.
Yeah. And just finally, can I ask you about your relationship with the FBU? You said that you'd met with Matt Rack, the General Secretary. Can you say about, obviously, getting the cultural change that we all want to see, how the union is involved in that?
It's basically pretty good, actually. I've met Matt Rack on a number of occasions, and meetings have always been very constructive, very civil, mutually respectful, often quite productive, actually. I think we most recently met about a month ago, I would say, actually talking about these issues. So I met with Matt Rack and Mark Hardingham, the chair of the NFCC, to talk about exactly these culture issues in the fire service, but also actually in the FBU as well.
Let me just get that straight. That's 3 white men meeting together to talk about the cultural issues in the FBU, in the fire and rescue service.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, carry on.
My female members of staff supporting
right.
the Minister.
Yes. The meeting was not exclusively of that background. So yeah, we do have a good relationship, and we do discuss these issues, including as recently as just a few weeks ago.
Right, okay.
And if I might also just make a comment, I think MacRac recognises that the FBU has a key role to play, and also the fact that they sometimes can be representing the perpetrators as well as representing the victims. So they need to work because they, given the unionised workforce, they could both sides could be members of the union, and so there's a role that they need to play there. Again, we have. MacRac has talked about what they are doing to sort of strengthen the representation, so it's appropriate in both cases, and sometimes if they need to, they will withdraw representation.
Can I just ask you about that, because we have had some written evidence from the Fire and Brigade Union after their appearance a few weeks ago. They talk about that policy of all different, all equal, which is about representing perpetrators. Do you, in their information to us, they say they don't have any data about who they've represented, and they say that we should ask the fire chiefs and ministers about that. Do you have any information or data about the FBU and who they represent and how many cases?
I'm not sure it's entirely up to ministers to hold data on what the FBU get up to, but Sarah, do you know?
No, we don't have that data.
No, okay, nobody seems to have any data. So,
the FBU are the people that should have the data on who they're representing.
I'm surprised. I mean, they say the committee asked for the numbers of people the FBU had represented at disciplinary hearings. This is Matt Rack. I explained to the committee that this question is best put to ministers, fire employers and chief fire officers who are in charge of fire and rescue service discipline and for statistics on these matters. But you don't have that either. I just want to be clear. Nobody's got any statistics.
On FBU representation?
Not on FBU representation.
And that is something I would expect the FBU to hold. I mean, they are the people doing the representation after all.
Yes, I think the committee's of that view as well. But I just wanted to check with you in case we misunderstood and there was information. Can I thank you very much indeed for attending today? If there's anything else you'd like to say, Minister?
Chair, I did want to say one last thing, which is we obviously talked about the cultural issues that need to be sorted out, and they are very serious. But we should also, I think, just put on record our thanks to the firefighters, over 30,000 firefighters up and down the country who put themselves in personal danger every day to keep the rest of us safe. And I think we should just, note that the majority of firefighters are, public service orientated, doing the right thing, putting themselves at risk, and we shouldn't just lose sight of that as we rightly consider all of these other issues as well.
I'm very glad you said that, Minister, and I think the committee would absolutely endorse those comments. I think the committee would also like to pay tribute to all those brave firefighters who've come forward to explain where things have gone wrong in the fire service, where they haven't been treated properly and appropriately, and have spoken out, because that also takes a lot of bravery to do that. And I certainly have spoken to firefighters who are going through the process at the moment of calling out bad behaviour, and I know how stressful and difficult that is. So I think the committee would just like to put that on the record as well.
And I would certainly endorse that, and just to add to it, would strongly encourage any firefighter who has concerns to report their concerns via the channels. We've got the independent line that we talked about. There's obviously the union, or indeed to report it through their local MP or other channels that are available as well. And then secondly, to any firefighter that may be listening, if you do see behaviour on your watch that is wrong, please have the confidence to call it out, because that is the way, ultimately, we're going to bring about the change that we need.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes our session. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.